So I listened to a interview with Dennett recently, and he was asked about how his theory of consciousness, he wrote a book called Consciousness Explained a while ago, and he thinks it's holding up pretty well in light of neuroscience and computer science. He thinks the brain is some kind of computer, but he admits that neurons are more than just on-off switches, they're agents, and so he says our consciousness is like this social achievement. I kind of
That's cool.
like that idea, obviously.
Well, maybe
as a Whiteheadian.
But
yeah, but I don't think the brain is a computer. I think the analogy just doesn't hold anymore. But he was asked about panpsychism, and the interviewer was like, a lot of serious philosophers in the last several years are taking panpsychism seriously, and it seems like there's this movement away from the materialistic sort of views that you defend, and some people are even entertaining idealism. Can you believe that? And Dennett was like, yeah, basically, it's embarrassing, and ultimately I think they're just young philosophers trying to find their niche and sell more books or something. Which I just felt it's beneath him as a philosopher. He claims he engaged deeply with panpsychism before dismissing it and then challenging the motives of those who take it seriously, but I don't know.
Yeah, doesn't sound like a very philosophical thing to say.
Yeah, I don't know that
general.
He has genuinely taken it seriously. I mean, to engage with it, you'd need to take it seriously enough to listen to the arguments. And
and to respect people who are making the arguments.
Anyways, I don't want to...
Anyway, yes.
Dan Dennett is awesome. Even though I disagree with almost everything he says, his books are written so clearly, it just provides a nice foil to say, this is the best articulation of a materialistic theory of consciousness that we could ask for. And here's why it doesn't work. And I've often turned to his work for that, as to treat him like a foil.
Yeah, that's great.
But he gets criticized a lot because he says consciousness is a user illusion, which is kind of like analogous to the desktop display.
It's the interface.
It's the interface, yeah.
Yeah. It's so hyperbolic, it just... it's kind of funny, but continue.
Well, he's been criticized for this by a number of other philosophers because, a panpsychist like Galen Strawson will say that consciousness seems to be is precisely its nature. It is a seeming, and so to say that it's an illusion doesn't explain it. Why should there be an illusion? In other words, given Dennett's understanding of consciousness is just a really complicated computation of some kind, why are human beings aware at all? Why couldn't our brains just do it unconsciously, like computers
just be like
do?
A machine?
Yeah. And so, there's still this, even if you say consciousness is an illusion, that it only seems to be real, why should it seem to be?
It just kind of nullifies the whole question,
Well,
to say that. And then it's like when people say everything's a simulation. It's like the same, it's similar, I think.
Well, so Dennett has this argument against panpsychism where he says, okay, I'm just going to invent this other thing called pan-niftyism.
Really?
Yeah, and so everything has niftiness. Everything's nifty. And he's like, distinguish what panpsychism is adding to our understanding of reality from what pan-niftyism is adding to our understanding. Which to me that's not a serious engagement.
No.
With the panpsychist.
He's being very condescending.
Metaphysics. I think he's not clearly distinguishing between metaphysics and science as well.
Oh, okay.
Because panpsychism's changing the frame.
Well, usually I think materialist accounts such as his, they don't really respect that difference between metaphysics and science. That's how they can presume to say what they, do.
Right. So I think Dennett's theory works really well for a universe where there is not even a user illusion, where there's just computation.
Yeah.
Just zombies, and Dennett makes fun of the whole zombie argument that I guess David Chalmers developed, but that's ultimately where you're left with Dennett's explanation. We just shouldn't be conscious.
Yeah.
And the panpsychist is saying, okay, given that we are conscious, whether we seem to be or not, the whole point is we seem to be.
Yeah.
What must be the case about the nature of the universe if we want to avoid big problems like the mind-body problem or the hard problem of consciousness? And so it's just a reimagination of what matter is. It doesn't make any new predictions. It's not a scientific hypothesis. It's a metaphysical scheme, an alternative to materialism, which I guess the rub is that Dennett would say materialism is not metaphysics, it's science. And that's the sticking point, I think. So with this disagreement, it's not even a disagreement, it's a misunderstanding or just missing each other, because Dennett's presupposing that equation between science and materialism.
Yeah. It's got these, what's the word?
Presupposition?
Yeah, the unacknowledged, what's the word?
Priors?
Allegiance. Or, to a certain epistemology.
So how would you try to go about defining science in a way that makes clear it's not equivalent to materialism?
You mean the kind of science he's talking about?
No,
or?
I mean the science that you would want to talk about that's not equivalent to materialism.
How would I distinguish it from metaphysics? Or what do you
what
asking?
is science?
What is science?
I mean, someone like Rudolf Steiner can talk about spiritual science.
Yeah.
Or Geisteswissenschaft. How is it that he's applying the scientific method to something spiritual? It clearly is a more encompassing or deeper definition of science than what Dennett's using.
Yeah. It's the, I think this, Steiner will talk about, the emergence of science, especially in relation to the I, like the capital I. And so, I guess what is a very general description of it is a method of, I guess, discerning reality, and like being able, a method that attempts to achieve some kind of precision in its descriptions. And so, but people will limit that when they talk about materialist science, where it's just, it's limited to the senses and then kind of empiricism, but that also sort of it presupposes, or it assumes that there's not also like super sensible faculties being engaged when that is being done. For example, like imagination, with, as many scientists talk about, famous scientists, their discovery of theories imaginatively or dreams or...
Right. But Karl Popper used to distinguish between the logic of discovery, which does draw upon imagination and sort of this intuitive leap to a theoretical understanding of a phenomenon, and the logic of justification, where you need to experimentally or mathematically kind of prove what you're claiming, so that it holds up to criticisms. I don't think Popper would say you could prove a scientific theory. It's just a matter of whether it can be falsified or not, and whether it has been falsified. But yeah, the thing with science, like normal modern science of the materialistic sort is it also, in addition to being empirical, in the sense that it's only allowing data from the senses to count as real, it's mathematical as well. And whereas, I mean, math, the organs that we engage in order to consider mathematical equations, these are not the physical senses.
Yeah.
So science already presupposes
that's a great example.
higher knowledge than just empiricism. And I guess what Steiner or others who would say, we can have a broader like science of the mind, say, if not the spirit, then there's more than just these mathematical organs, more than just quantitative reflection, but qualitative
and dynamic processes,
archetypal perception.
Go ahead.
So I think science, even in its materialistic form, it's already opened the door to these higher forms of knowledge through mathematical understanding. The question is, can we extend our conception of supersensible knowledge beyond just arithmetic and geometry?
Well, I think Goethe is a good example of that, and that's what some of a couple writers that I read recently, anthroposophists, I guess. I don't know if they identify that way, but there was a journal about an anthroposophical journal about chaos theory and just the new sciences in relation to spiritual science, as Steiner would call it. But I wonder what the German word is. I would like to
for what
use that word for spiritual science.
Oh, I'm pretty sure it's Geistwissenschaft.
Okay, I'm not gonna say it right now, but I think just thinking about fractals, and this is what I was writing about in my essay, is a good example, because the fractal, is can be, there are mathematical formulas for fractals, different fractals, and so that's the kind of familiar mathematical aspect, but there's also their manifestation in living processes. And then you can recognize, I think the fractal is a good example, that it's not just the mathematical formula. There's something happening, and it can be attuned to. And so that's kind of, I think that's what one way of, maybe even also, this is obviously related, but having a science of consciousness that doesn't just try to reduce everything and say that, for example, consciousness is a user illusion.
Yeah, defining consciousness in terms of something else.
Yeah, because it's what we're working with.
Sure.
It's what we are.
Science presupposes consciousness as capable of, verifying sensory experiences and mathematizing those, or quantifying and calculating, measuring those sensory experiences. And consciousness can pursue mathematics sort of in a pure sense, untethered to anything empirical. Science presupposes that. Yeah, totally.
We wouldn't even have science without, we wouldn't have a world without consciousness. And the activity, of thought that unites concepts with sense.
This is why idealists feel totally justified in their ontological point of view, which is saying that ultimately everything's in consciousness. Matter is just an appearance in the mind. I think that takes it a little too far.
Me too. It's also it's not coherent with our experience.
Right. There's clearly a tension between inside and outside. Matter's not merely an illusion.
Yeah.
Right. There are. I think matter is just a. People talk about consciousness as this suitcase term that means whatever baggage people want to carry along with them. It just means whatever you want it to mean. Matter is kind of the same thing. It's just a very abstract category.
Yeah.
And we've never actually seen matter.
Yeah.
No one's seen matter. It's form. Right. We've only ever seen form.
Yeah.
right? The further down we magnify nature, or the more sensitive
Appearance.
pictures we try to take of the cosmic background radiation, it's always form. We're not arriving at any stuff. What would that even look like?
Yeah.
You couldn't see it. There's just pattern and the interplay of pattern, and so
And density.
this is why the fractal
There's
example.
different densities.
Densities, yeah. I like that what you mentioned about fractal mathematics, because it gets us out of nominalism, where math isn't just something that the human mathematician is kind of inventing.
That's absurd, I think. But continue.
The fractal shows up in nature.
Yeah. Inside us, like even in our temporal our experience of time and our body's makeup as well.
Yeah. So the pattern is ontological. It's not merely something epistemological. Or nominal. But I'm really curious to find ways to communicate to serious philosophers like Dennett, and to scientific materialists in general, to communicate effectively about what is being proposed when we talk about an ensouled universe. It doesn't mean that every grain of sand is contemplating death and secretly wishing for to be on a beach somewhere or whatever, which is Dennett said they think every grain of sand is conscious, and that's a caricature. As if panpsychists aren't more sophisticated than that.
Some people might mean it that way,
Yeah, well, that's why there's animism. And now this is just for the sake of distinguishing two different views. I don't mean to put animism down, but the idea, like that mountains have souls or whatever, I could, in a religious context, understand this, but we could distinguish between animism and panpsychism, where one is, more like a primal form of communion with the cosmos, and the other is a refined philosophical system in terms of concepts and categories. And a panpsychist could also be an animist, but an animist is not necessarily engaged in philosophical discourse about their animism, trying to work out the difference between a grain of sand, say, and a living cell or a human being, or but I know animism, I think, was invented by a colonial anthropologist to put down pre-scientific people. So I don't want to mean it in that sense.
Yeah, but it's been a reclaimed term by some, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, the outlier in human history is definitely the materialist, disenchanted view of the universe. It's pretty bizarre, and it's all indications so far are that view is psychologically unhealthy and ecologically destructive, because look at the type of society it's created when that view has become widespread, and we're on the verge of destroying ourselves.
Nobody takes responsibility for anything, and it's just like a runaway train. We're
just computers. Sam Harris says free will is
I can't believe
pre-modern superstition.
That's crazy to me. Oh my gosh. I just think that is so irresponsible. To me, it's almost like somebody cut their head off and is holding their head saying, humans have no freedom. You know what I mean? Like, it just...
Yeah, and neither of us would want to imply that Harris is immoral, but he's confused, we would have to say. Because you're right, it's the height of irresponsibility to claim you have no freedom.
Well, and also if you have influence and you're influencing others with your ideas, I think it is it's unethical to say that.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we counter it in our public offerings.
Yeah, of course, exactly. gotta be able to say things like that.
Yeah. Well, I love Whitehead's statement that scientists animated by the purpose of proving that they are purposeless constitute an interesting subject for study.
Yeah, that's a great quote. It's a nice little quip.
Yeah, because it's an important thing for philosophy to iron out. Like, how did we become so confused?
Yeah.
Because I feel like Kant is an important touchstone.
Yeah.
Just to remind materialists, like, that science itself presupposes as its own transcendental condition, a rational mind.
Yeah.
And science can't try to reduce its condition of possibility to mere mechanics.
Yeah.
It's pulling the rug out from under itself.
Yeah. Yep. The machine's trying to make the maker a machine.
Maybe the arts are the best way to pursue this. But the problem is materialists they could easily just say, oh yes, that's a pretty picture or a beautiful play or story or movie or whatever, but now we're back in reality.
They might also feel something from it. It might change them. You know?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah. But I'm really struggling to find a way of communicating, because I don't know how many people I've converted from materialism to panpsychism. It's like some people are inclined one way or the other and find reasons to justify their inclinations. And
yeah, I don't know that it's worth trying to convince people unless they, I like this, making responses to people, and maybe they'll listen to it and engage with it. And I think that's also helpful for other people to hear criticisms, so that they can have different ways of thinking about things.
Yeah.
If they're not, challenging it themselves or not sure what to think or... Well, I was also just going to say that when you were describing, like, how did this happen? That it's been really helpful for me to thinking about this when I think of the way Steiner describes the evolution of consciousness and how in his picture we once were, we had that atavistic clairvoyance and just we kind of we're part of the music of the unfolding cosmos, and we were just, I guess, synchronized with that music, and even in a kind of noetic way, but maybe not necessarily in a kind of conscious, like, intentionally willed by an individual sort of way, chosen. And then there's like this progressive severance and descent into densification, and this amnesia, and also this no longer having this atavistic, like, kind of confluence with the inside of the world. And so now we're like having to, we're like in that, and we're like, okay, remembering, I guess, in a way, in many ways, by like just like confrontations with like in a kind of ontological political way between the colonial civilization with remaining indigenous traditions, psychedelics, psychedelic renaissance, quantum, the new sciences, and all these different, the new interest in astrology, like huge interest. It's just so normal now among younger generations, and I think these are examples of that kind of turning around.
Yeah. Dennett went to this conference in Tucson, Arizona, about unconsciousness, and there's a lot of far out ideas there. And he got up on stage and said, I feel like I'm a cop at Woodstock, and
Oh my God.
needed to rein in all the hippie kids.
That's hilarious.
'Cause I think Dennett says there's just people, young people especially, who are holding out for some kind of woo, some kind of magic and mystery in the world that science, Dennett thinks, by its very nature is going to continue to dispel. And he feels there's a regression toward this, longing for magic. And that's why there are more serious philosophers interested in panpsychism.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think he's wrong.
Yeah.
I was also gonna say right before you shared that there are some people who are kind of like committed to this way, to the standard, I guess, picture, or the mainstream picture of how things are, especially if they've made careers out of articulating that.
Mm-hmm.
So doesn't really have much incentive to change his mind if his life is, especially in a capitalist context,
So the same sort of argument against panpsychism that Dennett was making, that it's all about these people's careers and trying to find
maybe that's just a projection, because honestly, I don't think that's the case for most panpsychists. It's more about meaning. So to me, maybe he's given himself away. I don't know.
Yeah, well, if he's right, that's a real it's damning for academic philosophy as a discipline.
I mean, that could happen too. There might be some people like that out there, but would say probably not the majority.
Yeah, I haven't encountered many academic philosophers who are like scanning the available perspectives on a question for the one that might allow them to sell the most books. I mean, Dennett needs to give us all the benefit of the doubt that we're pursuing the truth just like him.
Yeah.
And if we happen to disagree, it's not because some of us are careerists and some of us are real scientists or real lovers of wisdom.
Yeah, that's why I was thinking that one thing that might be an effective communication to someone like him is to, like, I don't know, give him like a philosophical history lesson and just reveal like how much of what he claims to do and that perspective has arisen out of others, and like a kind of larger context of metaphysical context.
Well, I think I wouldn't necessarily want to question Dennett's understanding of the history of philosophy. I mean, his teacher, I think the most important teacher, was Gilbert Ryle. He's kind of like a neo-behaviorist. I hope it's okay to say that.
Why wouldn't it be?
I don't know. That might upset people. But he was inheriting like Wittgenstein and just this idea that philosophers are confused when they refer to subjective things, and that we need to clear up our language.
Okay.
It's kind of a form of positivism, ultimately. And, Dennett's coming out of this approach, and sometimes this school of thought in cognitive science, the shift to what's called cognitivism, is said to be a reaction against behaviorism, because behaviorism just black boxed the mind, and the cognitivists are looking in the mind, but for them the mind is just the brain or the software running in the brain. So it's just a subtler form of behaviorism. There's still no inside, no interiority. And so neo-behaviorism, I think, is basically Dennett's approach here. That there's really no there when we're talking about the interior depths of experience. Somehow that all needs to be, we need to cleanse our language of that, at least when we're doing science, so that we can talk about the nuts and bolts of neurons and electrochemistry and stuff. But I'm just saying, Dennett would acknowledge his lineage in at least 20th century philosophy, and I would be curious, though, to hear what he thinks about Plato.
That's what I mean. I mean, bring it all the way back to Plato and root science in astronomy and talk about dianoia and this and
Right.
Fioria.
Right. Dennett hasn't written a history of philosophy book. Bertrand Russell did. And Russell's history of philosophy, I think, is... I mean, I read it when I was probably 19. It was fine as a first pass, but gosh, I'm glad I didn't stop there. Because he just treats the certain philosophers of history as though they were just not as smart as him. And he had no conception of the evolution of consciousness.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because he doesn't have any sort of sympathy for what it was like to be in this time and place of a Plato or an Aquinas. And so misreads them, just fundamentally misunderstands them, and caricatures them.
Yeah.
And so all these people nowadays have this caricatured understanding of Platonism that has nothing to do with what the dialogues say.
They perpetuate it. In academia, people talk shit about this way. Talk about Plato, and they don't even know that Plato wrote dialogues.
Right, or they just conveniently forget that.
Yeah, because they never read them.
So, history is important. The arts are important. So not just like pure argument is going to persuade someone that materialism is a faulty worldview. That seems like, okay, that's some progress. We need a many-pronged approach. But maybe there's just no point in trying to convince other people. Just articulate your own view as clearly as you can, and
and that's enough.
Let people do their own thinking.
Yeah. I guess to me it's almost like a sickness to go on claiming that the universe is totally meaningless and our consciousness is a user illusion. It just isn't. I don't think thoughts like those are good for it. But I also think probably most people who hold thoughts like that are actually really inconsistent with their lives, in relation to those thoughts. They contradict the way they live their lives. That's I love the drawing out performative contradiction, because that's, I think, a really important aspect of philosophy, and truth is like how much it accords with the way that we live our lives.
Yeah, I mean, I know I believe Dennett to be a very ethical person, and to have...
Yeah, I mean more like cultural sickness.
Right.
Yeah, not him himself.
It takes a special kind of person to adopt materialism intellectually and still remain...
and to argue for it.
Still retain a sense of self-esteem and a sense of moral clarity and responsibility. Because it's easy to become a nihilist, to see that, well, if it's ultimately just blind matter in motion, and before life or mind emerged somehow, there wasn't any value at all, it's easy to sort of write it all off and just say, well, fuck it. I'm a bit, more than a bit, worried about the spread of what's called antinatalism, or I guess
oh, really?
Ephilism. Not sure if ephilism is the same as antinatalism. They seem synonymous to me. I could be wrong about that, but it's just this view that it's unethical to bring more children into the world, or any living beings into the world, and that if all life is just meaningless suffering, we should end it. Totally.
I think that is very worrisome, that there would be a lot of people
and it's justified with the materialistic
and the conditions of many lives, right? I'm sure like most of the people who are driven to adopt that view are traumatized
Yeah.
in some way.
Yeah.
And so it's like,
So that
it's convincing
they
to
might
them
even
because they live it.
Yeah, they might even accept that. Like, yeah, I'm traumatized.
Yeah.
We live in a universe that produces trauma on the regular.
Yeah.
So that's not very meaningful, is it?
Yeah.
So how do you respond to that?
I think, to me, in my experience, the trauma reveals that there is something good that could be. Because the trauma makes me feel that things aren't, that they could be otherwise, that I don't have to feel this way, you know, or that there's a state that might not be like this. So it's kind of like a
possible.
telos, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just like, this is what William Desmond, the philosopher, was talking about in the book that I recently read, parts of, what's that book called?
Intimate Universal?
Yes, yeah. He was talking about the conatus ascendi versus the passio ascendi, or something like that, and anyway, the endeavor to be, and that's like innate in the organism, and that there's already provided, you know, just the good of being, and that I think is connected with, I guess, a rebuttal to the argument that just that from the experience of trauma we can deduce that this world is only about producing trauma and it's meaningless.
So are these two terms, conatus ascendi and the...
I know that was one of the terms,
passiva, passive?
Hello.
Is
So
this equivalent to...
we have a patience. We receive our being, and then we endeavor to be as well. So, but there can be a recognition of so sin is kind of like being in this state where we think that it's just us trying to be in this hostile universe. But then the second yes, and so that's the first unconscious yes that we just make as an organism, is this endeavor to survive, basically, or to be.
Conatus. So Spinoza said that every body has a sort of desire to maintain itself as a body.
Yeah. And he says conatus because it's with. But with others. But then, there's the potential of the second yes, which derives from a recognition of the fact that we were given to be, that we didn't make ourselves. And that, I guess, to me, that's like related to this question of trauma and like the potential for goodness and love and peace. To strive for that.
Yeah. I like that. I was also thinking of Freud's Eros and Thanatos, the life drive and the death drive. Not that the death drive is equivalent to this recognition that we are given to be, but it is in a sense a recognition of our own finitude and limitation that comes with, at the same time that we strive to be and to individuate, we do so in full recognition of the fact that we are beings unto death.
Yeah.
As Kierkegaard put it. And so somehow the tragic and the I don't want to say erotic because you don't like it when I say everything is sexual. The tragic.
Well, I don't think eros and
natal
sex are the same thing.
So yeah, great, they're not. So the erotic and the life drive, as well as the tragic, or the sense of there's something inevitable about the rise and the fall. You know, and so to deny the tragic is to say to the traumatized people, like, why can't she just be happy? And I don't think that's fair, because birth is traumatic.
Well, and
birth itself is traumatic.
Yeah, and pain is part of the world. It's part of the growth of the world.
Yeah.
But not all pain, yeah, it's complicated to say that, but
celebration is also justified.
Yeah.
And I think if celebration is grounded and mature, it's not denying death, it's not denying loss or trauma. It's just gratitude,
Yeah.
And so I feel like materialism is a bit too, it's cosmic pessimism, and I feel like idealism is too optimistic or too inflated.
To me, yeah, it's also to me like a little kind of incoherent, and like it just makes everything vague to me. Like, like I think of Fichte, sort of like, it's like, how are things related to each other? Like, where did everything come from? Like, is it just me?
Yeah, it feels a little
solipsistic, I guess.
Narcissistic, maybe. Cosmic narcissism.
Solipsism.
I think idealism is far more sophisticated.
Of course, that's just
and self-critical than materialism.
Oh, it has to be.
I gotta say,
because
at least in the cases of like the German idealists, or even Bishop Berkeley.
I don't. When you were saying idealist, I wasn't thinking of them. Because
right.
Because just the context in which you were using the term idealist, it was kind of more pejorative. So to me, it was just kind of like I was associating it with like woo.
No, yeah. I mean, it's easy to do so, but there's also Plato and Schelling and Fichte, Schelling and Hegel. And
would you call Plato an idealist though?
Well, he's a realist in the ancient sense, which is to say that reality participates in ideas.
Yeah.
So I don't think, as long as you explain, I don't feel like it's false to say he's an idealist. I mean,
I guess it's such a vague term that it's kind of, you just have to specify what you mean. Just as well materialism is too,
Sure.
But but also materialism is actually more of a force in cultural life.
Yeah. That's
Most
true.
A lot of people don't care about philosophy.
Yeah. I guess that's a better way to talk about how animism differs from panpsychism. Animism is more like a cultural force. Panpsychism is an attempt to
it's more of an articulation,
bring conceptual rigor to that.
Yeah.
And just to say, I have disagreements with some of the more popular panpsychists in academic philosophy now, because they're still working in a way in
unresolved positivism, or
they're not thinking of reality in a relational way. They're thinking of it in a degraded Cartesian substance kind of way. As though mind goes all the way down, but mind as Descartes imagined it goes all the way down. And I think we need to understand consciousness and mind more generally as relational, and then it's really about how beings relate and commune with one another. Means knowing together, after all, knowing with consciousness. And so I feel like it's panpsychism of that variety, like Philip Goff, for example, I think has just as many problems. I know he's graduated to cosmopsychism or whatever, maybe we could talk about that some other time, but what he had been articulating, I think, has as many problems as materialism when it comes to adequately describing and explaining and bringing understanding to consciousness and its relation to the rest of the universe and its place in the universe, rather. So I just wanted to say I'm not like team panpsychism without any further qualifications.
Yeah.